So we've got now the gist of what the Minister of Finance had to present. It's a bit of an austere budget. I think the message is clear, Heidi, from the Minister. The budget cuts are coming. We'll see when February comes exactly which ones will be made. With that government reconfiguration being mooted out, would we see some cuts there or not? But we'll find out in February. It's going to be an interesting one because of the election year being what is ahead of us in 2024. But let's bring you some more reaction and analysis and other insights with economist Dawie Roodt, who's been patiently waiting in the wings, listening to some of that reaction coming from the political parties earlier here this afternoon. Dawie, thank you very much for your patience and welcome here to today on eNCA. I mean, overall, nothing really that came out from this midterm budget would surprise many of us because there's an undertone there. There's a clear message that budget cuts are coming and there's no more bailouts just for free and none currently for Transnet, for example, until certain things have happened according to the minister. There is also an extension of the SRD, that special COVID-19 social distress grant, by another year, that 24 billion rand being thrown in. That was expected as well.
Yes, indeed. Good afternoon to you. Well, we've heard all of this before. Okay, my first impressions, the budget of the Minister of Finance, I think the Minister is generally too optimistic in terms of his expectations for economic growth, as an example. I don't think we're going to see economic growth of 0.8% and certainly not close to 2% in 2 years hence. So I think too optimistic as far as that is concerned. And then there's something that we have to be aware of, and that is the Minister is quite, let's call it economic with the truth here. Because there are certain of these figures that are very important to economists and to analysts and to the International Monetary Fund and the rating agencies. And those are figures like, for example, what the deficit is going to be, what the debt numbers are going to be. And clearly the Minister of Finance did not include many items in those figures. Let me give you one or two examples. In the case of Eskom, for instance, Eskom numbers are not included in there. The IMF previously already indicated that it should be included in there. In the meantime, Eskom's finances deteriorated even further. We just heard yesterday they made another loss of 24 billion rand. And Eskom can't go on like this. And obviously the day is going to come when Eskom are going to ask for even more money. And that is not included in the deficit or is not included in the deficit or in the debt numbers whatsoever. The same goes for the local authorities. The local authorities, the Minister of Finance promises that he's going to alleviate, write off, his words, about a third of the local authorities' debt. That's approximately 20 billion rand. That also is not included in the deficit, but it's also not included in the debt numbers. We know about Transnet, and Transnet asked for debt relief of 60 billion rand recently. There's nothing, of course, in the speech of the Minister of Finance. And of course, we can't expect the Minister of Finance to have all of this included in a speech of today, because many of these things, like, for example, assisting Transnet, will probably be covered somewhere in the budget, in the actual budget in February. But the Eskom numbers was already covered in the budget this year, and it is not included in the deficit. It's not included in the debt numbers and many of the other numbers. So I think the Minister of Finance, clearly, we are in very deep trouble here. The debt numbers are much worse than what the Minister is explaining to us, or what is actually the numbers that he's giving us. And the fiscal deficit is going to be much higher, and the growth is simply not going to materialize. Of course, there are some good news.
Yeah, before the good news, I mean, while you say he didn't include all these numbers, some of them might be included next year. He did, though, concede, and as he said in his words, our public finances are significantly weaker. We are in trouble.
Yeah, but still, the numbers are not correct. The fiscal deficit is not going to be 4.8% to GDP. It's probably going to be around about 6% or 6.5% even to GDP if you do it correctly. And it's not as if the Minister of Finance is really trying to pull the wool over our eyes. There are some technicalities here. Like, for example, if you take over some of Eskom's debt, should you include that into your deficit, or should you simply move it to your debt numbers directly? So there's a bit of an argument, but it's a technical argument. Okay. But the point is, the total debt numbers are not correct in the end. That's the basic point.
Yeah, I saw a figure that by 2025, 2026, the gross debt could be around 6 trillion rand. Whoops.
Yes. But more importantly is rather to look at it relative to the size of the economy. And relative to the size of the economy, the Minister of Finance reckons that we're going to stabilize the debt around about 77%. Remember, just keep in mind what I've just said about the debt of Eskom and Transnet and those other things. That's not included in those numbers in any event. But he said he's going to stabilize around about 77%. I don't think so. I think we're going to see 77% soon, next year. And thereafter, it's going to go up even further. But like I've said, there is some good news. The Minister of Finance is making it clear he wants to consolidate certain things. That means, hopefully, that they're going to close down a lot of departments. Hopefully, they're going to get rid of all these army of ministers that we have and deputy ministers and everything that goes with that. That's a good place to start. So let's hope those kind of reorganization is going to take place, and that's going to save some money. But I guess that's some good news. So the good news coming with the bad news is that if you really squeeze them, if they really get into the corner, then eventually they start doing the right thing.
Yeah. Is it good news that there will be no further major bailouts for state-owned enterprises, the likes of Denel and SAA and so on?
That's just not true. Now, we've heard it how many times before. There will be bailouts. Transnet will be bailed out. Transnet can't go on like this. Eskom will be bailed out more than
he did say Transnet will be assisted. Even currently, they're looking at assisting them with their current debt obligations, but the further monies to them will only be dependent if they set an objective. I think there were 3 objectives that he mentioned. So there is a bailout in the wings for Transnet.
Yeah, but it will happen. They're going to put all these conditions before they're going to get the money. And in some instances, they will qualify, in some instances, they won't. But the reality is that if you don't support Transnet or Eskom, then the economy is going to collapse. You have to. Whether they comply with the conditions or not, you have to. So, and that's what's going to happen here. The same goes for even South African Airways asking for more money. What about the post office asking for more money? So they will get money. It's inevitable. It doesn't matter whether they comply with the conditions or not.
Then you wonder about the sustainability. I mean, how much more can you be doing this bailouts in a slow growth environment? You need the economy to grow, and it's not growing.
That is the problem. The problem is to get the economy to grow. We can do all these things, and we need to do many of these things. And we want to pay our grant recipients more, and we should be able to pay our grant recipients more. The problem is we can't do that because we just do not have economic growth. And we don't have economic growth because of mismanagement of the economy, mostly by government. It's a couple of own goals scored by government. It's a wrong macroeconomic policies. It is quite often plain straightforward incompetence. And it's quite often corruption going with that as well. So I would argue that yes, the economy is a problem in the end, but more importantly is we've got a political problem. And that is a problem not only for us, it's a problem for government as well, because the Minister of Finance, even though he wanted to make certain adjustments to the budget, he can't do that because there's an election around the corner. And I did hear you earlier mentioning the word austere. This is not an austerity budget, certainly not. This is a highly expansionary budget. If you run a fiscal deficit of 5% of GDP, this is not any indication of a restrictive budget. This is actually quite expansionary.
I don't know why he called himself Mr. Austerity.
That's not the case. No, that's not. He's Mr. Expenditure. That's what he is.
Yeah. Now there's also the issue of more money for the public service wage bill. I think it's 24 billion rand for this year, plus I don't know how many more billions for the next 3 years. That in itself, I wonder how it will play out in this new reorganization. You're already committing to be paying so much more, and there have been voices, Dawie, that says, as you said earlier, you need to cut back on the public sector wage bill.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that we need to do in the public sector wage bill. Just keep in mind that state spending has been going up over time as a percentage of GDP. And of course, even if the expenditure on a public wage bill goes down, it can still actually be going up as a percentage, if you understand what I'm trying to get to. So what we actually need in South Africa is really a professional civil service. That's what we need. We need a much more productive civil service. If we look at things like, for example, expenditure on education, which is the largest expense item, we spend more than most countries in the world, but the quality is absolutely horrible. Quite often we score the worst in the world. So that's what we need to do. It's not only a matter of spending money, but it's a matter of spending money wisely and well as well, and that is not happening.
Yeah, that's the challenge there in terms of where you put the money in. The question of infrastructure investment, I mean, he was emphasizing the need to do that, and some of the reaction that we had before we spoke to you, people welcoming the fact that, we need to invest in infrastructure, which will help maybe grow the economy.
Yeah, of course, that's a good thing. We should always invest in infrastructure. But unfortunately, what has been happening, we spend far too little on infrastructure on various levels. And one specific estimate that the economist does is that, or calculation that we do, is we see how much money the Minister of Finance borrows, and then we subtract the infrastructural investment from that amount of money that he borrows. The argument behind that is that it's okay to borrow money as long as you invest it in long-term assets. But it's not a good idea if you borrow money, if you spend it on short-term current expenditure. And unfortunately, what happens is that all this borrowing is not going to capital investments. A lot of that is actually going to short-term current expenditure, which means that the Minister of Finance is actually destroying capital in South Africa. So it is okay. I don't have a problem with debt levels going up, provided you have the capital to back that up. And we don't have that, because a large chunk of this borrowing is not going to capital, but it's actually going to current expenditure.
Yeah, meanwhile, the revenue side is not looking good. There's been a decline, even with personal income, from what he was saying there, because, we are in tough times.
Yeah, but it seems to me as if the Minister of Finance is planning to increase certain taxes next month. I did mention I'm still going through all the papers, and this is quite a lot of work that I still need to do. But I did pick up a paragraph somewhere where it makes it relatively clear to me that we can expect some.
But in an interview, in reaction, when he left Parliament, he spoke to my colleague Heidi Jokos. She did ask him, "What are you going to do about taxes?" And he said, "Well, if times are tough, we'll have to see where else we get the money from." He was not fully committing to Heidi to say we will increase taxes come February.
But you can increase taxes without increasing in taxes. Like, for example, just do nothing in the case of personal income taxes and bracket creep will result in an increase in taxes. That's one way of increasing taxes without increasing taxes.
Dawie Roodt, thank you very much for some of your insights. Initial reaction to the medium-term budget speech. As you said, you've got more work to do as you plow through what has come out, and maybe later on we'll get some more insights from Dawie Roodt. He's an economist. Of course, we are speaking on the back of the delivery today, the presentation to the National Assembly, to Parliament rather, by the Minister of Finance of his medium-term budget speech. Dawie Roodt does not agree that this is an austere budget. His view is that it's an expansionary one. We'll bring you more news around the budget and other stories as we continue today here shortly on eNCA.